In April 2025, Trump announced the largest tariff hike since World War II. Tariffs on China, 145%. On the rest of the world, 10 to 50%. Everyone was screaming, the end of global trade. Recession. Apocalypse. A year later, global trade reached an all-time high. Volumes, a record. The U.S. trade deficit remained virtually unchanged, $901 billion, the same as before the tariffs. How is this possible? If tariffs are the highest in 80 years, why hasn't the deficit gone anywhere? Because trade hasn't disappeared. It simply moved elsewhere. And who benefited from this shift? It will surprise you. First, a basic explanation of what a tariff is and who actually pays it. Imagine this: you're importing sneakers from China in 2026. Previously, customs charged 10%, meaning that if a pair costs $100, you pay an additional $10 in duties, bringing your total cost to $110. Now the tariff is 145%, and on those same $100, you're paying $145 in duties, so your cost of goods rises to $245. Does the Chinese factory pay those $145? No. You, as the importer, pay for it. Next, you raise the price because you can't sell below cost. For example, instead of about $120 before, the price becomes around $260 to $300. The difference between the old and new prices is effectively covered by the buyer. In other words, the tariff is a tax on the American consumer, disguised as a punishment for China, because those same $145 per pair are taken from the American market, not from the Chinese factory. Did Trump know this? Yes, he did, but saying I raised taxes sounds worse than saying we imposed a 145% tariff, which is why the word tariff is used. In 2026, the average household will pay about $1,500 more per year because of these tariffs, and this money is factored into the prices of goods. It is not China paying this $1,500. It is the American consumer. The tariff on China is 145%. The additional cost to a family is about $1,500 a year, and the actual pair is the American buyer. On April 2, 2025, Donald Trump announces a new phase of trade policy in the White House Rose Garden, presenting a table of tariffs for various countries and calling it Liberation Day in response to the U.S. trade deficit.
My fellow Americans, for years the United States has faced unfair trade and massive deficits. That ends today. We are introducing a new reciprocal tariff system. If others tax us, we tax them. Fair and simple. Today, I present a tariff plan to restore balance, protect our industries, and bring jobs back to America. We call this Liberation Day, the day we take back our economic independence. Thank you. God bless the United States of America.
He states that starting April 3, 2025, reciprocal tariffs will be imposed on all trading partners to restore balance and support domestic production. Markets react with an immediate plunge, and China responds approximately 24 hours later by imposing 84% tariffs on American goods and signaling possible restrictions on exports of rare earth metals, which are critical to U.S. industry. A rapid escalation follows. The U.S. raises tariffs to 125% on Chinese goods. China responds with mirror 125% tariffs and applies additional pressure, notably through restrictions related to Nexperia, which creates risks for U.S. manufacturing. It becomes clear that the escalation poses serious risks to both economies, so the parties move to negotiations. In about 2 weeks, a truce is reached with tariffs reduced to around 30%, which is subsequently extended on multiple occasions. Thus, the most intense phase of this tariff war lasted about 2 weeks, after which it shifted to a format of temporary agreements. This is where it gets interesting, because trade has indeed changed, but not in the way Trump had planned. The goal was to force companies to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but that didn't happen because production simply moved to other countries with lower tariffs. Vietnam became the main beneficiary. Apple accelerated the relocation of part of its iPhone production, and Dell, Sony, and Nintendo did the same. So production didn't return to the U.S. but shifted about 3,000 kilometers toward Vietnam. Taiwan and South Korea benefited from the situation because the artificial intelligence boom in 2025 sharply increased demand for chips, servers, and infrastructure, and their exports grew significantly. Germany lost about 17% of its car exports to the US, while Chinese electric vehicles increased their share of the European market by approximately 50%, and for the first time, imports from China exceeded exports. The American consumer paid about $1,500 more per year and received no direct benefit. Vietnam posted record exports, Taiwan increased its share of global trade by about 35%, Germany lost 17% of its auto exports to the US, and the US trade deficit remained unchanged at around $901 billion. Analysts at McKinsey & Company note that trade did not decline but simply shifted routes from China to Vietnam and India, while the deficit remained the same. Trump emphasizes that the budget received billions, but this money was paid by American companies, which passed the costs on to American consumers, creating a domestic circular flow of money. And now, a twist no one saw coming. On February 20, 2026, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 6-3, finding most of Donald Trump's tariffs unlawful due to an overreach of authority under the IEEPA. The key point is that the government collected approximately $166 billion in tariffs from over 330,000 companies, and these funds are subject to refund. In response, Trump does not abandon his tariff policy but changes its legal basis, imposing new 10% tariffs on all countries for a period of 150 days, while simultaneously launching new trade investigations against China, Vietnam, Taiwan, the European Union, and more than 10 other countries. China responds in kind by opening its own investigations against the US, marking the beginning of a new phase of the conflict. As of March 2026, this is no longer a story of the past, but an ongoing process in which a new round of trade tensions has just begun. $166 billion is subject to repayment. Investigations cover more than 12 countries, and as of April 2026, the level of uncertainty remains at its peak. Here is a question that matters more than any statistic. Has the tariff war achieved its goal? The goal was to reduce the trade deficit, but the result has remained virtually unchanged, standing at approximately $901 billion with no significant improvement. Another goal was to bring manufacturing back to the US, but in practice, it did not return. Instead, it moved to Vietnam and other countries with lower tariffs. Another goal was to weaken China economically, but in 2025, China's trade surplus reached record levels as China redirected its exports to new markets, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. At the same time, a more fundamental shift has taken place, one with long-term consequences, as the world no longer views trade rules as stable and predictable. Companies around the world have begun actively diversifying their supply chains, not so much for efficiency reasons as to mitigate risks associated with political decisions, and this process is now irreversible. Globalization has not disappeared, but its nature has changed, and it no longer appears as stable and carefree as it did in the 2000s. So, the key question is, who actually lost Trump's tariff war? Not China, since it quickly pivoted to new markets and set record export figures. Not Vietnam, because it saw a significant influx of manufacturing and new investment in factories. Not Taiwan, since it increased chip sales and benefited from rising global demand. The main burden fell on the average American consumer, who pays about $1,500 more per year for the same goods without receiving any direct economic benefit. And the most telling point is that when you buy sneakers, a phone, or a laptop and see a higher price, the reason lies not in China's actions, but in domestic policy, which, through tariffs, raises the final cost for the buyer. So if you want to truly understand how the global economy works, how money flows, how industries evolve, and how major events like wars and crises quietly reshape the world around you, subscribe to Casper Economics.